some station was interviewing the curator for the 9/11 museum, and the description of the way that there were people who had walked all the way from the World Trade Center and the way they looked, just hearing that and remembering kind of me. That was my very first day ever running a grief support group in a school. I was in Waco, Texas.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Partnership Connections podcast. This podcast is centered around child welfare training and educational topics, all with the goal of helping to support those already working in or with an interest in working in child welfare. My name is Stan Brajer. I'm the project director for the learning partnership between the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF, and Rhode Island College. Our desire with this podcast is to bring information from experts on a variety of topics, all at no cost to hardworking professionals and others. And joining me again today as a co-host is Holly Pacheco from DCYF. Holly, good to see you. How have you been? I haven't seen you in a while again. It's been like 2 hours or 3 hours or something like that. Yeah.
Right? Good to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you again. So we're talking today about ambiguous loss, and I'm going to define it, but I'm not going to give too much away because I want our guests to be able to kind of really explain what it is, what it looks like, what the different types are, and that kind of thing. But essentially, ambiguous loss is loss that can be ongoing, unclear, and often unacknowledged, which can make grieving more challenging due to prolonged uncertainty. And we're going to talk about some of the complexities that both ourselves have experienced and the youth and families that we may be working with can face when trying to navigate ambiguous loss, while also discussing some ways to support them along their journey. So a little bit of a background on our guest today. Kate Tetuan Parent is a mom, partner, school-based therapist, and a griever who has a strong passion for supporting people who have experienced loss. Kate currently supervises and consults with schools as the Associate Director of Boston Children's Hospital Neighborhood Partnership Program. Kate, welcome to the show. Thank you for doing this, and it's great to see you as always.
Thank you. I'm so happy that I'm here, and I'm really honored to be able to kind of be in this space with you and talk a little bit more so that more people can learn.
Yeah, great to see you again.
Yeah, so we always appreciate when everyone, people take time out of their busy schedules to help us get some more content going and keep the show going and keep the episodes going. So I just gave a little bio of you, but tell us who you are and how has loss in your own loss helps shape who you are.
So I say that I'm a griever in my bio because it is a big piece of who I am. It's not it's a piece of me. It's not all of me. And I think for those of us who've experienced loss, we often recognize after years that it is kind of something we carry with us for the majority of our life, if not the rest of our days, when we've experienced a loss. And then that's okay. It looks very different as time goes on. And sometimes it doesn't. So it's nice to have these conversations so that people understand and can feel validated around kind of what loss has meant for them and how it's impacted them. But for me, I mentioned this a lot. My earliest memories of loss was around death loss. I had the honor and privilege of living in the same neighborhood as my family growing up. I got to see the majority of my cousins and extended family most days of my life. And because I grew up that way, community was really strong for me. And so when specifically my great-grandmother was actively dying, I have vivid memories of my entire family spending every day with her as her final days. And what that looked like was essentially a celebration. We talked to her, we sat with her, we talked to each other, we ate food, we sang. It's just the local, our priest was there, community members were there. I just remember feeling a part of something really big. And I didn't quite know, as I think I was 8 or 10 years old, what that really meant. I just realized that I thought that I should probably be scared about death, but for some reason, I just saw it as this kind of beautiful way of being able to say goodbye for now to my great grandmother. And I think while I want to acknowledge that that is not always the way that death plays out for people, for me, in that particular situation or that specific situation, it really laid the groundwork for who I feel like I am today. It's not that that I want to die or that I want people to experience loss. It just gave me this opportunity to see what loss can be in all different ways. And it can impact me in all the different ways in my life. And it doesn't have to be this kind of scary, dreadful piece. That's something that my family gave me. And the majority of the times that my grandmother, who was the daughter of my great grandmother, just died a few years ago. And same thing, just being able to sit with her. We were at the hospice facility and they kind of commented how we couldn't have so many people. And I politely said that this is our culture. We want to be with her. We want to be with each other. And I think that essentially is why I do what I do. I just feel like community and sharing stories and being around each other, especially when things are hard or there's hard spots in our life, which typically happen around loss, it's just something I feel like can be really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And there's a couple things in there that I'd like to expand on, if you will. One is you mentioned the celebration of life, and I think I always try to find that too when there's a death loss in my life, but it's difficult. And I'm wondering, like, maybe what your thoughts are on why we maybe don't see that or hear about that as much in our society, why there isn't a focus on celebrating that individual's life as there is, opposed to, obviously there's very tragic and sudden deaths and passing and stuff like that, but why maybe some people don't take that time to really reflect on an individual's life and celebrate their life, as opposed to those, not to minimize the feelings of sadness and stuff like that, right? But like, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on where we are as just like as our culture, American culture, right? And like where we are with celebrating lives and having that maybe be sort of a better way of looking at it, especially for young kids, right? So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that we often follow as individuals what we learn from our society and the community that we grow up with. So if we were to think about the culture of the United States, if we're just going back a century, like in the early 1900s, it really was, the focus was more on just being able to acknowledge a death and then move on. There wasn't a lot of advocating for people to sit with their feelings or to focus too much on the person, that it's just kind of this is what happens. And we celebrate maybe through a funeral or a homegoing ceremony. And then that's kind of it. Whereas over time, I think, and more recently, there's been more of a focus and more of, I guess, permission in our society for people to talk through what this means for them. And it also allows for them to spend a little bit more time remembering who it is that died or whatever their loss is. I will also say, though, I want to acknowledge that there are cultures that have always celebrated the person who is dying or who has died. And I feel like we don't often acknowledge kind of that this has been happening. And I can speak from my own culture of a Latino culture, a Mexican culture, where this has just always been kind of what we do, and celebration and community and being able to carry from generation to generation the stories of the people who have come before us and kind of laid the groundwork. I would also say, although I don't identify as a Black person, there's a lot of celebration in the Black culture that allows for, again, memory, tradition, sharing stories. And then there are some cultures that don't for whatever reason. And then that's okay. I do think, though, that the idea of, at least and again, in my culture, there's this kind of belief that when someone does die, there's kind of three components. One, when their heart stops, one when they are laid in the ground or wherever their body lies. And then the third component is the last time that someone can talk about them. So if we continue to share stories about them from generation to generation, they essentially never are gone. And that's what I advocate for, as hard as it can be to talk about some situations. And sometimes there's not great memories of the people who have died. We as individuals have to kind of find what that death loss means to us and to move and navigate in a way that feels helpful to us. And the more that society allows for that to happen and okays that you can celebrate, that you can share stories for years and years and years to come, the more I feel like people will feel like they are comfortable doing that and that is something that they can choose to do. It's just, it's kind of all about choices. I don't ever want to prescribe that this person has to do this or like, you should do this, because again, some of the memories are not great. And that should be up to the community or the individual as to how they want to move forward and acknowledge the loss. And in order to do that, we really have to have a society that allows them to have different options depending on what it is that they need.
Right. And I think that's a good point to make, right? Because it's sort of like, we don't want to tell people what to do. However, it sounds like for you and your experience, like there were advantages that death wasn't as scary, right? So maybe for that young person, if that person can be celebrated more or if that life is reflected on more, it will hopefully eventually lead to something that will click and the light bulb will go off for them that, hey, you know what, this death is a part of life, right? Like death is not maybe something to be, it's not that you, like you said, don't want to die or anything, but like, it doesn't have to be scary. We don't have to live our lives in fear of that.
Right.
And I also, my wife, we were talking and my wife and I are huge fans of the movie Coco, and isn't that, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but isn't that a part of Coco that like they have to continue to talk about the person to keep his memory alive, and then they sort of, plot. Spoiler alert, everyone! If you haven't seen Coco, you should probably,
you really should.
It's been around for a few years already, so I'm probably not doing too many spoilers for many people. But they've got to keep that person's memory alive, and I really like that. So
it is. It's the word I used to describe it as beautiful. And I know that can be hard for some people to hear, and that's not everyone's experience. And for me, many of the opportunities I've had, I mean, my mom died when I was very young, and I don't want to say that it was beautiful in the moment, similar where people were wrapped around her and wrapped around me. And I appreciate that. And at the same time, it was in the aftermath and, 30 years since, I can see the accumulation of, these early losses in my life, death losses that essentially, like I said, made me who I am and have allowed me to see the beauty and what I experienced, and the fact that I've been able that I can talk about my mom whenever I want with whoever I want. And that means a lot to me. And I think for a lot of people, that would mean a lot for someone just to be able to listen to you and for you to be able to talk about whomever it is that is meaningful to you. I do want to go back just to say to your question about, celebrating people and why that might be difficult for people. I think if we're thinking about ambiguous loss, I'm talking a lot about my experiences with death loss. Ambiguous loss, there's not always a clear answer as to why a person might not be around. So it's hard to celebrate what hasn't really ended. There's not a lot of finality to an ambiguous loss. There could be some assumptions as to why the person might not be around, or if they're not coming back, or you're not going to see them in the same way. And that makes it hard to celebrate or to spend time with, because then, for example, if someone has a mental health issue and shows up in a certain way one moment, but then for whatever reason, their mental health kind of doesn't bring them around a lot and is very inconsistent and kind of out of the blue when they do show up, it's hard. And there's not finality to that. So a young person who might be having someone coming in and out of their lives, us talking to them about celebrating is hard to celebrate what? Like I this person's still around. I don't know when I'm going to see them. And it could be as a support person to someone who's experiencing something like that. It can be okay to say like, well, what if you did want to celebrate something? What would that be? Or like, let's talk about things, talk about your story with them, and think about what you want us to know about them, or what you want us to remember about them. And also validating that some of the memories may not be all that great, or that they may not want to talk about that person because the inconsistent visits or the inconsistency of them in their lives. It's really important, again, for us to just take a step back sometimes, especially as a support person or a provider or a helping person or even a family member, is just to see where that person is. We have ideas of what might work for us, and that may not be what works for them. So I think a lot of times, especially young people who still are developing and their brain's still developing, them having some agency to grieve, and you can grieve a loss that's not death, but giving them the agency to grieve the way they want to can really go a long way for them.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, is there value in an ambiguous loss scenario? And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what exactly is ambiguous loss and the two different types. But is there value in helping the individual that's experiencing that? And like, let's take the example of someone that has a mental health, that psychological absence, but their physical presence is still there, to try to work with that person on, tell me what it was about the person that you really liked before this happened. And like, let's try to maybe hold on to some of those memories, and maybe that'll return if they get the support that they need.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to answer your question, yes, I think there are ways for us to be able to meet a young person where they are in that type of situation, and to think about, holding on to some of the memories that they have and what those might be. And there are times too, developmentally appropriate, maybe a smaller kid wouldn't be able to do this too much, but they probably could tell you in their words, and you could draw it for them or write it down or whatever it might be, or just listen. But being able to say kind of like, how do you picture your future? And what would that look like if this person was here, or if that person was there? What do you think that would mean? And being able to also talk through and help them recognize that what we hope for doesn't always happen. And it's okay to think about a world where there isn't sometimes consistency. And how do you do that? What do you need from me, or what do you need from yourself to be able to move through a world that you didn't really think was going to be that way? So I think giving kids skills to be able to think about, like, how did you, what was another situation that you got through and you were so proud of yourself because it was really hard and you were able to figure it out, and you did it. What was that? And it's really hard for kids because we don't ask them those types of questions usually. We don't ask each other that as adults. I think if we were to really sit and pause, it's hard for us to answer some of those things. And if you think about it from a young age, if we're helping them understand and helping them stop and think, like, what did help me? Like, how did I never want to go to school. How did I get to a place where I'm starting to go to school 4 days a week, 4 out of the 5 days? How did I do that? And being able to say, okay, so you had a friend in where you were living, and they walked to school with you and they got you, that was something that was really helpful. And you guys just talked about your baseball game or baseball. That was helpful to you. Like, let's think about if there's something that's not going well for you in the future, like, how can you use some of those same things that worked for you then to kind of think about how you're going to move through this hard time that you're going through now? So I think that it's interesting because I think, as working in schools and working with a lot of helping professionals for a long time, there's this narrative that you have to have the answers, that kids have to be able to, like, we want things to be okay for them. And we do. And really what we're trying to do is help them build lifelong skills that actually work when someone might be grieving, as well as any other kind of hard spot that they have. That's something that we all need to be able to do. I think that's something I always try to help or try to make sure people understand is what we're doing, yes, is important around grief and loss. And a lot of what we're trying to help the students and the young people do, or even adults do, is not wildly different than what we would hope the skills that they would have, that we would hope for them to have as skills just as human beings trying to navigate our world in the first place. It's just unfortunate when it can be riddled with loss too. The more they have those skills, even from a young age, in my opinion, and there is some literature that, a good body of literature that backs this up, that if you have those skills at a young age, then when you really need them, like in situations of loss, then it's not drastically different than what you've been trying to do to navigate your world in the first place.
Right. And I think what you touched upon too, in terms of just acknowledging what's going on for them, right? That this is going on, because grief for an adult is hard and complicated, right? And confusing and all the things, right? So for a young person, just even letting them know about grief and what it is, and that you can do that with someone who is still present, right? Or maybe in and out of your life, and how confusing that can be for them.
Right.
Especially when a person can change, right? And maybe be one person one moment, another person another moment, right? And that can even happen with our kids that, right, are working towards reunification, right? Maybe their parents are doing well and great, and then maybe they're not for whatever reason, right? Say there's substance use or whatnot. So just so really confusing for these kids. And I think as support staff, to just acknowledge that in itself, right? Of all the different emotions that they're having, and that it's okay. And to, like you said, kind of draw it out for them too, right? So they can kind of understand what's going on.
Right. I think even as adults, we don't feel like we have permission to grieve things or people who haven't died. In a lot of groups that I've done, we've had young people who are in the group because they've experienced a death loss, and we've had young people who are in the group because they've experienced an ambiguous loss, and that person is still alive. And for whatever reason, they're not in their life in the way that they'd like them to be. So I often talk to them about the fact that what we call kind of competitive loss, like there's no loss that's worse than another one. It's, your loss is always going to be the biggest because it's yours. And no one can take that from you. And that in the group, we don't compare what someone's experienced. So I think sometimes there were young people that were like, well, my person's still alive, so my loss is not as bad as, I shouldn't be in here. Like, I should be doing better, right? Because my person's still alive. And I'm like, no, you do how you do. And vice versa. Like if someone has experienced a death loss, because they feel like there's some finality to it, that they should have moved through this quicker, that's also not true. So everyone's experience is their own. And I really appreciate you saying that, that's just, we kind of have to meet them where they are, and they really have to guide us. And, what I would consider kind of the skills that I would hope everyone would have would be able to say, like, what are different feelings? Do you know what feelings mean? Do you know how you feel them in your body? As opposed to how people say that, like all of a sudden, sadness, how do you know that the way I feel sad doesn't maybe feel the same way in another person's body? So just helping them understand that there's all these different ways that you're so unique, not drastically unique, but you're so different that you'll never be able to find someone that can understand. It's more so just paying attention to the feelings that you have and the way that you support yourself that work for you. Because it's an individual piece. There are probably groups of people. That's what I love about groups, is you learn from each other. And you also see that, oh, this person does this. I should try, I could try that and see if it works for me. This person listened to this song and the lyrics really resonated to them, or like listen to, watch this meme or, this video or this TikTok or whatever it is. And I want to try that. And they may come back and say like, I don't know, it just didn't really do anything for me. And that's okay. Or they can come back and say like, wow, I tried what the TikTok person said and that really helped me. I love the fact that we talk about things and that we're giving the young people an avenue to talk about them, because that in itself opens up the opportunity for growth and understanding in a way that I don't think, at least, I was very fortunate, but a lot of people my age, I feel like still don't have those skills or abilities just because we don't focus on them too much.
I think the complexity piece is one that we probably all need to do a better job of acknowledging too, right? Because I look down at the bottom right of my screen and I see today's date, and I see a whole new generation that was not even born on 9/11. And I grew up 45 minutes from Manhattan, and I always loved looking at the World Trade Center and the Twin Towers when we would drive into the city or drive near the city. And I think that you can scroll through social media and you could see the images and the stories and stuff like that. And it's kind of re-traumatizing in a way, but it's also sort of like kind of makes you wonder, like, where is the space that gets held to? Like, I kind of want to be able to have some time to reflect on that day a little bit more. And I feel like we as a society have not really gotten there. Just the fact that I just feel like it should just be a day off where we need to reflect, like as a country, like as a society. And it's not, and that's just my personal feelings on it. But like, I think acknowledging the complexities of what we deal with within ambiguous loss as adults for young people can be probably pretty helpful too. That like, it's tough. It's not easy stuff to grapple with.
It's not. And I honestly heard on the way into work today, I don't remember which station. I do still listen to the radio. I know very few people I feel like do, but there was some station was interviewing the curator for the 9/11 or the September 11th museum. And the first question they asked was kind of like, where were you on that day? And the description of kind of the way that where, she was, I think she said somewhere in Upper Manhattan. And at a certain point, there were people who had walked all the way from the World Trade Center and the way they looked. And just hearing that and remembering kind of me, that was my very first day ever running a grief support group in a school. I was in Waco, Texas. And I actually had lived in New York in the city, a few blocks from the World Trade Center that summer. I had an internship at Gilda's Club in New York. And it really does bring you back. And I think, even my sons, so we are big Boston College fans and we go to the football games and a lot of the athletic events. And I think almost every team, if not every team, honors a young person who was in the towers and effectively saved several people and then ended up dying on September 11th. And they wear the red bandana that, apparently he wore in his pocket. And that's kind of how his family knew that it was him. That's that the people described this person having a red bandana. But I even my kids were nowhere near being born at that time. But the fact that they talk about it and they talk about that it's sad to know that someone that helped everybody, that they couldn't get out themselves and that they died. And even that is, it's not ambiguous loss per se. It's more so just the fact that they're acknowledging loss and that it's not like this person is not someone they knew directly. It's a story that they've heard every time we go to a game that they honor this person. And in that way, I think that they're understanding that there's loss. They're understanding that it makes them feel a certain way, which they've expressed as sadness. And they're essentially, in my mind, building the ability to recognize that there's feelings that come along with things that they learned that are really hard or that situations that impacted a lot of people. in a really difficult way. And even as young kids, they can understand that and they can see that, oh, mom is sad, or like this makes me sad. Or we went to the memorial this past spring and they saw that people were crying, and they were like, there were towers like this tall. And it's amazing to see their minds working, and that they can talk about death and they can talk about loss in a way that I'm pretty proud that seems to me that they're fairly comfortable doing. And I would hope that for most people, I don't want people to feel hurt and feel how they feel around loss. And the fact of the matter is, it happens to us, all of us. And so I encourage people to feel comfortable enough that they can understand the impact on themselves, how it makes them feel, and what they can do to kind of move through what they're experiencing. It is interesting. When you said that we were going to do this on September 11th, I thought it was interesting to think about. Because it's just something even young people who weren't alive at that time, it's still, I think for the most part, something that people know happened and has impacted.
And they were clear they were not even born, but they were clearly affected by it,
right?
As they've seen seen the others' reactions to remembering that and that sort of thing. And I think that's a good learning experience, kind of like you were saying, for them, like to be able to think about them. They weren't even born, but there's an impact on them still. So go ahead, Holly.
No, that piece led me into thinking about the storytelling piece that you had talked about in the training, because they've heard these stories, right, of these people. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that and, the importance of us telling stories and, how that can help with healing and grieving.
I love storytelling, and I'll say why. I do want to just briefly touch on because storytelling, I think, is so directly related to ambiguous loss, and I know that you talked a little bit about the types of it. So I'll briefly just talk about that, but then talk about why I think storytelling is fits so well with ambiguous loss, and and just in general, but ambiguous loss, and this is my experience of Pauline Boss's work. So I want to give her credit. She identifies kind of two types of ambiguous loss. One being kind of, Stan, what you said, is this psychological absence, but physical presence. So if someone can physically be around and may actually live with you, however, has a mental health issue or a substance use issue or some sort of Alzheimer's or dementia, like they don't show up, even though they may be there physically, even daily, they're not showing up in ways that you remember them to be for whatever reason, whether it's a substance they're using or a mental health situation. And that stinks. Like, that's not fair. And to the larger society, people would be like, but they're there, right? Like, you see them, you get to talk to them if you want to. And that's all true. And it's kind of a both and, yes. And I don't know who I'm talking to, from day to day. Or there are some days that this person has a really good day and we get to go to the park. And then there's other days that they have, weeks they don't get out of bed. So yes, they're here and they're not. So it's helping people recognize that is a loss. And even though you do see them every day, you can experience grief. Loss is the actual event. Grief is the bundle of emotions that come along with it. So if you've experienced something where it feels like a loss, or it is a loss, and then there's a lot of feelings that can come along with that. And one of them is, the culmination of that is grief. So the more we understand that, the more we allow kids and other people to grieve. When I would explain this to young people, they'd be like, no way. Like, that's why, I'm paraphrasing and making it seem like this aha moment. For some it was, but it took some explaining for some others. but that eventually they were kind of like, I would have never. I just thought that I was sad because of this. And I'm like, and you are. And if you're going to grieve, if you feel like you have to grieve, that's okay too. The second component is when you're physically absent and psychologically present. So this could be if someone is incarcerated. So you can visit them, obviously, but probably not whenever you want. And you can talk with them on the phone. And again, they're not at home with you. You don't get to see them on a regular basis. A lot of times when it was more closer to COVID, we would talk about the fact that, yeah, you could FaceTime, you could do the drive-bys to say hi to people, but to be told that you can't physically be present with someone that you would see every day, or your friends at school, or, even extended family that you saw pretty often, but to keep everybody safe, you had to not see them. That can be a loss. It can feel like it can be a loss for people. So again, giving people opportunities to grieve and understand that it's okay to have all these feelings and to grieve them, that is helpful for a lot of people to understand. I think that storytelling fits in, and I said this in the training, is that one, storytelling is something we've done for centuries. Even back like when there was no pen or paper, that's what, like when people see like these carvings and these drawings that people did in rocks, that's a story. That's something that someone drew so that someone else could interpret it, right? And there's, we get taught from a very, we've taught that we have to, we should be reading to our children, or there's stories everywhere. The fact that, like I said, generation to generation, I hear about like people I never met. And, I hear about their migration story to the United States and what that meant to them, and how we settled in this place, and the privilege that that's allowed me to have as a person. I think that stories are so important and easy to do. It's something, especially because I work in school so much, I say, we talk about stories all the time. We use stories in almost every subject. So it's not a huge lift when we're thinking about grief and loss, to shift away from something completely, or to try on something completely different, because storytelling is something we do all the time in school. I also think that storytelling gives the opportunity for young people to see a story or see themselves in a story, and then possibly make their own story that's kind of in conjunction with what they're seeing. And we can be very strategic as helping people to find books or videos or pictures or whatever it is that the student likes. And we can have them see it and then ask them how they fit, or do they see themselves in that story, or have they experienced something like that person is experiencing in the story or the video. And then there can be opportunities for young people to write their own story, right? Like think about with older kids, we've done like a timeline, and then like, okay, so let's put a story to this. Like, what are the things that from this time to this time, look at all these things that happened to you in your timeline or in your story. Like what helped you? What'd you do to get through all of those things? Like that's part of your story. So I just think that I think it's a tool that comes easily because we've all done it. And I think it's just super powerful because it gives you an opportunity to think about what has happened in your life, and also gives you an opportunity to sometimes rewrite certain parts of it, or even think about the future and what your story might be years from now.
Right. And I think that a key term for me in the definition of ambiguous loss is the word uncertainty. And you mentioned COVID, and I think that, boy, if there ever was an event that had a lot of uncertainty around it, right? That's one for all of us, really, probably, right? So I remember where I was working before, it was, we're all going to go home for 3 weeks and see what happens.
Yep.
So I guess my question, and then we all know what happened from there, right? So my question, I guess, for you is, how do we or do we not try too much to, especially when working with young people or anyone really, this level of like hope, especially for that person that sometimes there might not be any coming back, right? That Alzheimer's, dementia, things like this is we're saying this is not going to get any better, right? Like so
Mhm.
there, and we have to kind of cross a different bridge, but maybe there is hope. Like you mentioned incarceration, like so how do we like balance if we're trying? I know we want to try to like take a step back and just sort of empathize and validate feelings, but is there any balancing of hope for someone to say like we don't want them because I feel like we don't want them to be completely hopeless that it's
Mhm.
never good because maybe that just compounds the grief, but we also don't want to give them like a false sense of hope that
Right.
that person's going to get better and everything's going to be fine and you're going to be reunified or
Right.
reunited with them and it's going to be rainbows and unicorns,
Yeah.
right? So
I'm always a big advocate for honesty. I'll go back to my own experience where I felt like there were a lot of whispers, especially around my mom's death and or the days leading up or the month leading up to her death. That as a young person, I knew they were talking about her, but no one was really talking directly to me. So I think we always have to think is even little, toddler age kids, even infants, that they all grieve in their own way. And I think, that's a whole nother conversation as to developmentally kind of what it looks like. However, to your point, this sense of hope that we can give people really falls on honesty. So no, you would never say like this, they're going to get better because when you know that they're not. I think that there's different ways for people to define what hope is. There can be ways to, again, to not lean into this kind of toxic positivity or like putting a silver lining on everything. More so that let's think about how we would celebrate this person. Grandma or whomever is, they're for whatever reason, their brain is just not working the way that our brain works. And eventually their brain and their heart is going to stop and we're not going to be able to see them every day like we do. And that's the truth. And yes, we have to sit it with how painful that is and how that makes us feel. And we can also think about, okay, so when you're ready, let's think about what, as sad as this is going to be, like, what do we know about grandma that we want other people to know? Or how would we, in a few years from now, like, what would we want to do that you always wanted, that you always did with grandma? Like, do you always went to the park? So like, we can go to the park whenever you want. It's just this, it's how we kind of as helpers view what feels hopeful to them without trying your hardest to not build up situations that aren't truthful or going to actually happen. So I think, especially with ambiguous loss, the fact that there's so much uncertainty, you have to just say that, gosh, we'll never know. We're never going to know if they're going to come back unless they do. And then they may go again. And that is not fair. And what I would like for us is for us to, when you're ready, like, let's think about like what you do want to remember. What does feel hopeful to you? The fact that you, even though they're not here, that you still have their, their favorite jacket or something, then, and if you want to wear that or if you want to keep it, that could be a sense of hope for you. It's really helping them define what feels like something they can move toward, not to forget everything, just to be able to feel like there's something outside of all the feelings that they're experiencing.
yes, I think we're so desperate for control of situations and to try to fill as much uncertainty with certainty as possible. And I think so desperately would want to give a young person hope, but that's only gonna probably backfire in the end, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think honesty is as hard as it is for us as adults because we don't want to be, it's uncomfortable for us. We don't want to make other people uncomfortable. And the fact of the matter is there's discomfort. And again, you're modeling for a young person that discomfort is going to happen and we can live with it. We can figure it out together and we will see another day. It's, again, really hard to do. As helping professionals, we have to be able to understand what that means for us so that we can help others. And like I said, model for others that, there's no getting around it. This is not fair. Nobody should ever have to do this. Nobody should have to see this. And this is where we are. So let's figure out how we're going to get to tomorrow.
I think it's so important what you said about just knowing where we are with our grief and, death, and everyone is so different, right? And I think that's so important, especially when we're working with others. Maybe we need to send them to someone else for support, right? Because maybe we have our own issues with grief or whatever it might be, and we're not going to help the situation. So I think that's something that's so important, is to really just kind of look at yourself and just see where you are in terms. People are so different, right? Like you said, everyone is so unique. And a very long time ago, I was a social worker in a cancer clinic, and I dealt with death and dying. That's what I did, right? And that's when I learned I really enjoyed that work. Some people are like, how can you enjoy that? But it was very rewarding to be able to be with people at that time in their lives. But what I also saw was just everyone else, like not just that person who was sick, but their family members, and where everyone was, like, grief is so different that everyone's at a different stage, right?
Right.
And it's so complicated. And some people are very comfortable, like I am, with talking about death and dying. Like, what are your wishes when you die? What do you want? And some people are like, I have a family member, I won't talk about it. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's talk about it. And they're like, no,
Right.
Right. So everyone's just so different. So I think it's just so important to, just as workers, right? If you are one of those, like, I can't talk about it, or we don't talk about it in my family, or we don't mention names, or whatever it might be, to be aware of that. And maybe there's a better person, right, who can help, give the support that a young person needs, or whoever. It could even be a coworker, right? We all have our own loss, right? And I think that's such a thing that people can bond over too, is just loss, right? Like you said, with the groups, it's a deeper level.
It is. And I think it's important to know that that we don't have to have all the answers. And oftentimes I'll say, like, because people are like, well, what do I say? And I'm like, you don't have to know what to say. You can say that. You can say, oh, I don't have the answer for you. Like, let's figure it out together. But yeah, there's this narrative that, like, as an adult, you have to have all the answers and know what to do. And you don't. There's not a script. Everybody's different. And that may be really deflating to hear. And I hope that it's encouraging to know that, like, you're not going to know the answers. You just won't. And that's okay. You can figure it out together, or there might be a coworker that might be a better fit, or you could talk with the coworker and you could, join together to kind of tackle what's going on. You're not alone. Everyone has their own experiences. And I think the more we understand that and the more we give people grace and ourselves grace, the more I think we'll be able to build up some comfort around this topic and just more understanding so we can feel comfortable and help others feel comfortable just kind of being where they are in their grief.
Yeah, I think that's great. One other thing that I saw in the training, you had it on the PowerPoint, and it was just something I don't know, I just want to mention. I don't know if you want to ask any other questions, Stan, or jump in, but it was on one of your wrap-up slides, and it said, loss can impact every aspect of a person's life. And I wrote it down because it's just so true. And it was just something that I read, and I'm like, oh, it just really had meaning for me. So I just wanted to tell you that. It was something that really touched me during the training. So
yeah, I think sometimes people are like, well, isn't that obvious? And I'm like, I don't know if it is. I think it's important for people to recognize, again, like there's things that, again, working with young people, especially in a school, oftentimes we're like, what in the world? Like, why are you doing that? Like, you shouldn't be doing that. And I think going to your point that there are situations that sometimes we'll never know about. And that's directly impacting the young person in all these different ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, all these pieces that they end up behaving or reacting in ways that we just don't understand. And the more we understand that, or stop and say, and this is something a supervisor told me a long time that I will never forget, is like, we just need to pause and say, like, there's a reason. We may not know what the reason is. They're not choosing to do this for the most part. It's just something's going on, and we need to help them understand what that might be, and then how to figure out what the next steps might be. So yeah, the fact that hard things that happen impact the entirety of who you are as a human is just a reminder to us as helpers and as individuals who might be also experiencing the entire being of yourself being impacted, that we have to give each other grace and just settle for just a little bit.
Just a final question for me is that you talked about your own kids and their ability to kind of like share in others' grief, and maybe that coming as a little bit of a surprise to you, but what are some of the biggest misconceptions that adults have about youth and their ability to grieve and their ability to understand loss?
The biggest misconception is that they're not affected by it. They're not affected by loss, or that it just doesn't impact them. And I would say that it probably doesn't impact them in the same way as it would an adult or even an older adolescent or even someone who's 9 or 10 years old. And even 9 or 10-year-olds, it's going to come in waves, and it won't look like them being able to say, like, I'm sad. I'm sad that so-and-so is dead, or like, I'm sad that, that I don't know when I'm going to get to see my brother again. Like they may not come out the way that we would think that it would. It could come out. And they say this, especially with younger, like toddler age kids, it's going to come out in their behavior. They're not going to be able to say what's going on, but they might, if this particular person, if it was a brother that gave them a bath every day, and then all of a sudden the brother's not there anymore, maybe at bath time, they're going to start reacting because they don't know where he is and they don't really know how to ask. So we're looking and seeing like this misconception that it's not impacting them. It's not impacting them in the way you think that it should. It's just they're different. They're younger. They're going to ask and say like, oh, I'm sad. And then the very next minute, they're going to joke around. That's just who they are developmentally, their brains. And I think I heard this on a podcast recently too. Sometimes I think as adults, it could benefit us too, that we can like sit with it a little bit and then move back from it. And it's okay to do that. We don't have to sit in kind of this solemn kind of hard space forever. And I think we can learn from kids in that way, in that like they sit in it and then they remove themselves. And it may be you're curious, like, what were they doing? This isn't bothering them at all. And it is. It's just their body and their brain sits with it for a shorter period of time. And then they're able to kind of pull away and then do what they need to do. And then there'll be other times that it comes up. I think another misconception is that it's not going to bother them for that long. And what I would say to that is, again, it may not impact them the way that it does an adult. I will say, though, that, especially if they've experienced a loss at a younger age, it's going to impact them differently at all different stages of their life. That's why I say that it kind of carries through, and not to be fearful or like, make you feel horrible that, oh God, they're going to have to live with this for the rest of their life. Well, yeah, it's going to be a piece of them. They've experienced something that might have not allowed for them to really understand how to develop like a certain emotional capacity. So then when they're 16, if they're reacting in a way a toddler does, it's because they didn't really learn how to help themselves. So then as a 16-year-old, you're like, what is going on? Why are they tantruming? It's just, again, it's that all these different these developmental stages, brain development stages, it just impacts them throughout their life in different ways. So no, they do not get over it quickly. It just might feel less of an impact at a certain stage. And then when they hit a certain age, it may feel like they're revving up again. And that's okay. And it's important for us to understand that as adults, so that we're not thinking that there's something wrong with them. It's more so that, yeah, they've experienced something really difficult in their life. Now they're old enough, their brain understands it differently. And it's almost like they're re-grieving what they've experienced before.
I think that goes for every experience, right? And especially when we talk a lot about trauma, right? And that's we can't go back, and the past is what happens. It happened, and you're gonna live with that forever. So it's just a matter of how do you deal with it and how do you move forward, right? The same thing with this. So
yeah, and I think there are situations where the grief is so overwhelming that it probably does need to be addressed in a different way. I would say the majority of us are able to sit with our grief, once it's acknowledged, and acknowledge our loss, be able to feel our grief, and to be able to think of ways to support ourselves. If there is a situation where it's just so overwhelming and the person's not able to function in the way that they should be able to, then that's a different situation. And there's, they would probably need a more specialized type of support that could move them into a space where they do feel more comfortable and are able to move through their grief. And sometimes people just need a little extra to be able to do that.
Yeah. It sounds like it's a continuum, right? And we want to be able to make sure that somebody doesn't go too far in one direction, but everyone's going to deal with things differently. So, Kate, any final thoughts? Holly, any final thoughts?
I guess one of the things that stood out that you said today was about just giving to others, but also giving to yourself grace. And I just think that's something that people can keep in mind. Right.
Yeah. This is a work in progress. We all are. And I think, the biggest piece is that we continue to allow people to be who they are. And as much as possible, I'm, just continuing to advocate for us all to learn so that this does feel a little more comfortable for everybody.
Right. Allow yourself the opportunity to experience your own emotions, and it's okay. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Kate. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Such an important topic.
Thank you.